Chapter 1. The dinner I was not successful enough to attend. The day my own family created a group chat for Mother's Day and wrote "Successful Kids Only," my name was not even on the list. They told everyone I had moved away because working in a factory was too embarrassing for the family name. What they didn't know was that the only person who actually cared about my real life was my grandmother. When she died, she left me everything: her house, her savings, and the truth about who had really been there for her. My family tried to take it all back by dragging me into court and accusing me of manipulating an old woman. The judge read the evidence, looked at their lawyer, and ruled that the will would stand exactly as written. Overnight, the people who called me a failure were the same ones begging for money. My name is Hannah Walker, and this is the story of the day my family learned what it really costs to call someone a failure. I found out I was not invited to my own Mother's Day dinner from a group text while sitting in my old Toyota Camry in the employee parking lot outside Ridgeway Box and Paper in Knoxville. The message was short: Mother's Day dinner this Sunday, successful kids only. Underneath it were 3 names: Nathan, Rachel, Daniel. My name was not there. For a moment, I thought maybe the message had been cut off. I scrolled up and down. Nothing changed. Then the reactions started appearing. Nathan added a champagne emoji. Rachel reacted with a crown. My mother pressed the little heart. No one asked where I was. A forklift rolled past my car carrying a stack of flattened boxes. The machine rattled the pavement hard enough that I felt it through the steering wheel. I reread the message 3 times before I locked my phone. My name is Hannah Walker. I am 30 years old, and I supervise the morning shift at Ridgeway Box and Paper on the industrial edge of Knoxville, Tennessee. Every weekday, I arrive before sunrise to make sure the cutting presses and folding machines run smoothly for 8 straight hours. When the machines start, the entire concrete floor vibrates. Cardboard dust clings to your clothes. By the end of the day, your hands smell faintly like glue and paper. In my mother's world, that is not a career. It is a humiliation. The funny part was that the group text did not actually shock me. It just confirmed something I had known for years. The story of how I became the family embarrassment started back in 2016. At that time, I was halfway through a business degree at the University of Tennessee. My father, David Walker, had passed away 3 years earlier after a long stretch of heart problems. When he died, the house we grew up in seemed to lose all its warmth. Bills kept arriving. Tuition climbed higher every semester. My part-time job at a grocery store barely covered rent for a tiny apartment near campus. By the middle of my junior year, the math stopped working. I packed 2 duffel bags, boxed up my textbooks, and drove back to my mother's house in Nashville. She was standing in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked at the bags first, then she looked at me. "You quit," she said. I tried explaining everything: tuition payments, loan interest, the hours I had been working just to stay enrolled. She listened quietly. Then she took a sip of coffee and said the one sentence that would follow me for years: "Do you realize how embarrassing this is for me?" After that day, our family slowly reorganized itself. My brother, Nathan Walker, was already the golden child. At 35, he worked in commercial real estate in Nashville. His social media showed rooftop bars, luxury condos, and perfectly tailored suits. In reality, most of his deals collapsed before closing, but he drove a leased Mercedes and spoke with confidence. That was enough for my mother. My sister, Rachel Walker Clark, was 33 and worked in pharmaceutical sales. She lived in a neat suburban house with white trim and a 2-car garage. Her husband, Daniel, ran a heating and air conditioning company. At family gatherings, he liked to talk about tax deductions and market forecasts. Then there was me, the daughter who packed cardboard boxes. At first, my mother simply avoided mentioning me when people asked about her children. Then, around 2020, she created a new version of my life. Hannah moved to Seattle. She works in tech now. I discovered the lie at Thanksgiving. A distant cousin asked me if Seattle traffic was as terrible as everyone said. When I told him I still lived in Knoxville, my mother squeezed my arm under the table so tightly my fingers went numb. "Don't start drama, Hannah," she whispered. So I stopped correcting the story. The moment everything finally snapped happened 2 years ago at Rachel's birthday party. I had just finished a 10-hour shift at the plant. I drove almost 3 hours from Knoxville to Nashville without even stopping for dinner. Before walking into the house, I changed shirts in a gas station bathroom because cardboard dust sticks to fabric. Rachel's house was full of guests. Music played softly, glasses clinked, the kitchen island was covered with wrapped gifts. When Rachel opened my present, she lifted the sweater from the box and smiled. "Factory overtime money," she said. Daniel laughed. Nathan raised his glass of bourbon. My mother stood nearby holding a glass of white wine. She did not say anything. No one said anything. For a few seconds, I waited for someone to step in, to say that was enough. No one did. So I set my plate down on the kitchen counter and walked out the front door. No argument, no tears, just the quiet sound of the door closing behind me. After that night, I stopped trying to impress them, which is why the group text in the factory parking lot did not really surprise me. Successful kids only. The words glowed on my phone while the sun slowly rose above the metal roof of the plant. For the first time in years, I felt something close to calm. I realized I was done asking for permission to belong. So I did something small. I did nothing. I did not reply to the message. I clocked in for my shift, checked the cutting press alignment, and walked to the production floor like any other morning. During my lunch break, I opened my phone settings and changed my number. The next time my mother tried calling, the number she dialed no longer existed. I stopped driving to Nashville for holidays. I stopped explaining what I did for a living. I simply disappeared from their version of the family. Weeks passed, then months, and nothing happened. No angry voicemails, no confused relatives asking where I had gone. No one showed up at my apartment door in Knoxville. The silence stretched into a full year. Eventually, I understood something that should have hurt more than it did. My absence had not disrupted their perfect story at all. To them, I was just the daughter who had quietly drifted away. And the truth is, I probably would have stayed gone forever if someone unexpected had finally reached out. The person who called me that morning was the last person in my family I thought would still remember my name.
Chapter 2. The only people who noticed I was gone were strangers. The woman who called me that morning was the last person in my family I ever expected to hear from again. Her name was Margaret Hale, my father's mother, and hearing it pulled me out of the quiet routine I had built for myself in Knoxville. Her voice sounded steady and calm, older but still sharp. "Hannah," she said, "I was beginning to think you had forgotten your old grandmother." I sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment, still wearing my work boots from the early shift. "No, ma'am," I said. "I just changed my number last year." "Yes," she replied softly. "I noticed." Outside my window, the sky was turning pale with morning light. I had finished my shift at Ridgeway Box and Paper about an hour earlier, and the faint smell of cardboard dust still clung to my jacket hanging by the door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that made my back straighten. "You are not in Seattle." "No." "You never were." "No." There was another small pause. "Good," she said. I blinked in surprise. For years, I had imagined what would happen if someone in the family discovered the story my mother told about me moving to Seattle to work in technology. I always assumed the reaction would be embarrassment or anger. Instead, my grandmother sounded relieved. I poured a cup of coffee and sat back down. "Are you healthy?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you working?" "Yes." "What kind of work?" I hesitated for half a second before answering. "I supervise a shift at a packaging plant." The reaction I braced myself for never came. "That sounds like honest work," she said. The words caught me off guard. My mother had spent years acting as if my job was a stain on the family name. Hearing someone say the opposite felt strangely unfamiliar. For a few minutes, we talked about small things: the weather in the mountains near Boone, the tomato plants she was trying to grow in her backyard, the price of groceries that seemed to rise every month. Then her voice shifted slightly. "Your mother tells people you work in technology out west." "I know." "And you let her say that." "I used to correct her," I said. "It never ended well." "Your father used to say that a woman could turn embarrassment into a full-time occupation." Hearing my father mentioned after so long made the room feel quiet. When he was alive, my grandmother had always been the only person who asked me real questions about my life. She never cared about titles or salaries. She cared about whether I was doing something honest. Back then, I did not realize how rare that was. She spoke again. "I stopped believing most of what your mother says years ago." That admission did not shock me as much as it should have. "Why?" I asked. "Because the stories change depending on who she is talking to." I leaned back in my chair. "That sounds familiar." "Your brother and sister visit when they want something," she continued. "Your mother visits when she wants attention. None of them stay very long." I pictured her small house outside Boone. My father used to take me there during the summers when I was a kid. We would sit on the porch drinking iced tea while he fixed loose boards and my grandmother watched from a rocking chair. She continued speaking. "But you always stayed longer when you visited, even after your father passed." I had almost forgotten those trips. "I did not think anyone noticed that," I said. "I noticed." Her voice carried a quiet certainty that made me believe her. Then she said something that shifted the entire conversation. "Your brother called me last month." My stomach tightened. "Nathan called you?" "Yes." "What did he want?" "He asked if you had heard from you." I frowned. That surprised me. "Why?" "He sounded nervous." Nathan nervous was not something I had ever seen growing up. My brother moved through life like someone who assumed every door would open for him. "Did he say why he was looking for me?" "No," she said, "but he asked about you twice. The second time he called, he wanted to know if you were still living in Knoxville." I stared at the wall across from my kitchen table. "How would he know that?" "Your mother tells people you moved to Seattle," she said, "but your brother did not sound convinced." Nathan must have started asking questions somewhere. Maybe a mutual friend from Nashville, maybe someone who had seen me in Knoxville, or maybe he had simply run out of options. "Your brother is not doing as well as he pretends," my grandmother said quietly. I almost laughed. "The real estate market has not been kind to him." That sounds about right. Apparently, he carries quite a bit of credit card debt. I had heard rumors about that through distant relatives, expensive car payments, deals that never closed. "What about Rachel?" I asked. "Your sister is comfortable as long as her husband keeps working." The image of Rachel smiling at her birthday party flashed in my mind. Perfect house, perfect life. Or at least the appearance of one. "Your mother still tells people all three of her children are very successful." "All three?" "Yes. Even the one she claims lives in Seattle." We both went quiet for a moment. Then she spoke again. "Hannah,
I would like you to come visit me. When? Soon. I glanced at the calendar hanging beside my refrigerator. My next stretch of days off was at about 2 weeks. I can drive then. Good. Her voice softened. There are things we should talk about in person. What kind of things? She did not answer right away. Family matters, she finally said. Something about the way she said those words made my stomach tighten. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time staring at my phone. For a year, I believed my disappearance barely mattered to anyone in my family. Now, I knew at least one person had been paying attention the entire time. And if my grandmother wanted to discuss family matters face to face, there was a good chance my quiet life in Knoxville was about to become much more complicated. 2 weeks later, I would discover that my grandmother had not only been watching my family, she had been quietly preparing for something none of them were expecting. Chapter 3. My grandmother was the only person who asked about my real life. 2 weeks later, I was driving north through the Blue Ridge Mountains with the windows slightly open and cool mountain air moving through the car. The road climbed slowly through forests that grew thicker the farther I went. I had not driven this route in years, not since before everything with my family fell apart. My grandmother lived outside Boone on a quiet hillside road where the houses sat far apart and every mailbox looked slightly crooked. When I turned into her gravel driveway, the porch light was already on. Before I reached the door, it opened. Margaret Hale stood there in the doorway, thin and upright despite being 82 years old. Her white hair was tied neatly back, and her eyes were sharp enough to make anyone uncomfortable if they were hiding something. She studied me from head to toe. Then she nodded once. "This is the granddaughter who disappeared." I smiled faintly. "Good to see you too, Grandma." She stepped aside and waved me in. The house smelled like black tea and cinnamon. "Boots off," she said. "The floor is clean." I pulled them off and followed her into the kitchen. The room looked almost exactly the same as I remembered from childhood. The wooden table by the window, the old radio on the counter that always hummed softly between stations. A gray cat sat on the windowsill, watching us with quiet authority. "That is Winston," she said. "He believes the house belongs to him." The cat blinked slowly, as if confirming it. She poured tea into 2 heavy mugs and sat across from me. For a moment, she simply looked at me, the way my father used to examine a broken engine before deciding how to fix it. Finally, she spoke. "So, tell me about your real life." "I supervise a shift at a packaging plant outside Knoxville," I said. "What exactly do you supervise?" "There are 6 machines on the main line, cutting presses and folding stations. We turn flat cardboard into shipping boxes." She leaned forward slightly. "What is the first thing you check when you arrive?" "The blade alignment on the cutters." "And how do you know when the blades are worn out?" "You hear it before you see it," I said. "The sound changes." Her eyes softened. "Your father used to say machines speak if you listen carefully." The mention of him made the room feel quieter. My father had believed honest work deserved respect. After he died, that belief seemed to vanish from the rest of the family. But my grandmother understood it immediately. "I am glad you found something real," she said. No one in my family had ever said that to me before. That evening turned into a long conversation. We talked about my job, about the drive through the mountains, about the rising cost of groceries and the way winters seemed shorter than they used to be. Then she asked something that made me hesitate. "When was the last time you visited Nashville?" "About 2 years ago." "And your mother has not called since?" "No." She gave a small nod as if confirming something she already suspected. "I thought so." "How?" "Because she tells people you moved to Seattle." I laughed quietly. "She still says that?" "Yes." "And you knew it was not true?" "I stopped believing most of what your mother says years ago." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "Your brother Nathan called me last spring." My shoulders tightened. What did he want? "Money." The answer came so quickly I almost smiled. "Did you give it to him?"
No. What did he say? He claimed he was between deals. That sounded exactly like Nathan. She continued calmly. He also asked about you. What did you tell him? That I hadn't heard from you recently. You did not tell him where I was. No. Why not? She looked at me carefully. Because I wanted to see if he would try harder. And did he? No. That answer carried a strange weight. Over the next several months, I began visiting her regularly, almost every weekend when my schedule allowed. The drive through the mountains became a quiet habit. Sometimes I brought groceries, sometimes I helped repair small things around the house. Once I spent an entire afternoon fixing a loose railing on her porch. She never asked for those things, but she always noticed them. Evenings usually ended with us sitting on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the hills. She told stories about my father when he was younger, about the first car he rebuilt from scrap parts, about the time he drove across 3 states just to help a friend repair a broken engine. One night, she said something that stayed with me. You came here without expecting anything from me. I looked at her. What do you mean? Your brother has visited twice in 5 years. Both times he asked for a loan. And Rachel? She calls sometimes, usually to talk about furniture or vacations. She folded her hands together. You simply show up. I like being here. That matters, she said quietly. Months passed that way. Then one evening, while we were sitting outside, she spoke again. Money reveals character faster than hardship. I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time, but she clearly did. Early that autumn, my phone rang while I was finishing a shift at the plant. The caller introduced himself as David Carter, an attorney in Asheville. His voice sounded careful. Hannah Walker. Yes? I represent Margaret Hale. Something cold moved through my chest. What happened? Your grandmother passed away peacefully this morning. The drive to Boone that day felt longer than any road I'd ever taken. Rain streaked across the windshield the entire way. When I reached the house, the porch light was on just like it had been the day I arrived months earlier. Inside, the living room Winston rubbed against my leg. The house was completely silent. A week later, I sat across from the lawyer in his office. David Carter opened a folder on his desk. Your grandmother updated her will last year. I waited. He looked at me carefully before continuing. She left everything to you. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. The house here in Boone, approximately $420,000 in savings, and her shares in the local credit union. I stared at the desk. What about my mother? He glanced down at the paperwork again. She was specifically excluded. The room went quiet. I knew my family well enough to understand exactly what would happen once they heard the news. The quiet life I'd built in Knoxville was about to collide with the family I thought I had left behind. Chapter 4. The only time my family came looking for me was when money appeared. The first person in my family to discover the inheritance was not my mother. It was my brother Nathan. Real estate agents spend a lot of time watching property records, ownership transfers, new listings, county filings. It becomes a habit after a few years in the business. 2 weeks after my grandmother's will was filed with the county clerk, my phone started vibrating on the kitchen counter while I was eating dinner. The number on the screen came from Nashville. I let it ring. A minute later, another call came. Then a text message. We need to talk. I did not answer. 10 minutes later, a second message appeared. Families should not do this to each other. That one came from my mother. For a year, my absence had barely mattered to them. Now, suddenly, they were very interested in finding me. The voicemails started the next morning. I listened to the first one sitting in my car before my shift at Ridgeway Box and Paper. Hannah, this is your mother. I just heard something very strange about your grandmother's house in Boone. I assume there has been some kind of mistake. Call me. I deleted the message. The second voicemail came from Nathan. Hannah, listen, Mom is upset and nobody really understands what happened. Just call me back so we can talk. I deleted that one too. The messages continued for several days. Rachel sent a polite text asking how I had been doing. Daniel suggested meeting for lunch so we could discuss the situation like reasonable adults. None of them mentioned the inheritance directly. They did not need to. A week later, a certified envelope appeared in my mailbox. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a formal notice from a law office in Nashville. My mother had hired an attorney named William Granger. They were contesting my grandmother's will. The accusation was clear: undue influence. According to the filing, I had manipulated an elderly woman who was no longer mentally competent. I read the document slowly. Then I read it again. Fighting a legal challenge like that could cost tens of thousands of dollars. I did not have that kind of money. A week later, I sat alone in my car outside a Walmart parking lot after work, staring at my bank account on my phone. The retainer fee for a defense attorney would take almost everything I had saved. For a moment, I thought about giving up. Maybe it would be easier to walk away from the inheritance. A knock on the window made me look up. Tanya Briggs stood outside the car with her arms folded. I rolled the window down. "What are you doing, sitting here looking miserable?" she asked. "Family problem." She opened the passenger door and climbed into the seat. "Explain." So I did. I told her about the inheritance, the will, the lawsuit my mother had filed. When she finished, she shook her head slowly. "Your family sounds exhausting. That is a polite description. You got a lawyer that?" "I cannot afford one." She pulled her phone from her jacket pocket. "I know someone." "That sounds dangerous. My cousin works for a probate attorney in Asheville." She stepped out of the car and made a call. 10 minutes later, she returned. "You have a meeting tomorrow." "With who?" "A lawyer named David Carter." The next afternoon, I sat in a quiet office across from him while he read through the documents my mother had filed. He finished and leaned back in his chair. "They are claiming your grandmother was not mentally competent when she changed the will. She was completely clear-minded." "That helps," he said, "because they will have to prove otherwise." "What do we do?" "We collect evidence." Over the next several weeks, that evidence started appearing piece by piece. Visitor records from the local credit union showed that I had accompanied my grandmother to several meetings during the past year. Medical records confirmed she had passed every cognitive evaluation her doctor administered. Financial notes from her files documented 2 separate loans she had given Nathan over the years. The most important piece arrived in a sealed envelope. My grandmother had written a letter explaining exactly why she changed the will. David Carter slid it across the desk. "You should read this." The handwriting was steady and careful. She described our visits, the work she had seen me doing, and the disappointment she felt watching the rest of the family treat money like entitlement. When I finished reading, my hands were slightly shaking. "That will matter," David Carter said. Eventually, the case moved to depositions. Nathan sat across the conference table wearing a dark suit that looked slightly too tight around the shoulders. The opposing attorney asked him a simple question: "How often did you visit your grandmother during the past 5 years?" Nathan cleared his throat. "Fairly often." David Carter placed a document on the table: the visitor log from the credit union. 2 visits recorded in 5 years. Nathan stared at the paper. No one said anything. A few days later, William Granger contacted David Carter. My mother could withdraw the case quietly if both sides agreed. David Carter called me that evening. "They are offering to drop the case." "What does my mother say?" "She refused." Of course she did. The hearing took place in a small probate courtroom in Asheville. The room was quiet except for the soft shuffle of papers. My mother sat across the room with Nathan and Rachel beside her. For a moment, our eyes met. She looked at me the same way she had always looked at me when I disappointed her. The judge reviewed the evidence slowly: medical records, visitor logs, the letter my grandmother had written. The room became very quiet. I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing.
Finally, the judge spoke. The evidence does not support the claim of undue influence. He paused for a moment. The will stands as written. The sound of the gavel echoed once through the room. Air rushed back into my lungs. My mother stood up immediately and walked toward the door without looking at me. Nathan followed her. Rachel hesitated for a second before leaving as well. David Carter gathered the paperwork calmly. "You handled that well," he said. I looked around the empty courtroom. For the first time since the lawsuit began, the tension in my chest finally eased. But I knew something else as I walked out of the courthouse. People like my mother rarely accepted defeat quietly, and this story with my family was not finished yet.
Chapter 5. The day my family lost the money, they lost each other. The months after the court ruling changed my family in ways none of them expected. For years, they had built their lives around the idea that money would always appear somewhere. A good real estate deal, a profitable business contract, or eventually the inheritance they assumed would arrive one day. When the judge confirmed my grandmother's will, that illusion disappeared overnight. At first, nothing seemed different. Nathan continued posting photos online as if his life was still moving exactly the way it always had. Expensive restaurants, polished suits, carefully angled selfies that never showed the details around the edges. But appearances have a short lifespan when the bills are real. A former colleague from Nashville called me one afternoon out of curiosity. Apparently, Nathan's BMW had been repossessed after 3 missed lease payments. The dealership arrived early in the morning and towed it from the parking lot outside his apartment building. Not long after that, his landlord began eviction proceedings. Real estate had slowed across the city, and the commissions Nathan once counted on were no longer enough to support the life he had been pretending to live. The same friend told me something else. Nathan had started asking people for short-term loans. Several of those people had said no. The first time he contacted me directly happened late one evening. My phone buzzed while I was sitting on the couch reading. Nathan's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. His voice sounded different than I remembered. Less confident, less certain. "Hannah," he said quietly, "I know things ended badly between us." I waited. "Listen," he continued, "I just need a little help getting through the next few months." The request hung in the air between us. For years, I had been the sibling considered unsuccessful, the one who worked in a factory while everyone else talked about investments and promotions. Now the roles had reversed. Nathan cleared his throat. "I heard about the inheritance. I figured maybe you could help me out a little." For a moment, I thought about all the dinners where I had been treated like an embarrassment, all the conversations where my work had been dismissed as something temporary until I became someone more impressive. But the anger I once carried was gone. "No," I said calmly, "I cannot do that." The silence on the line lasted several seconds. "I understand," he finally said. We ended the call without saying goodbye. My sister Rachel tried longer to maintain the image of a stable life. Her social media accounts still showed smiling photos and carefully arranged family dinners, but behind those photos, reality was changing quickly. Her husband Daniel ran a heating and air company outside Franklin. It was a reliable business, but not the kind that could quietly absorb the financial problems of several relatives. According to the same network of acquaintances who seemed fascinated by the situation, Daniel had eventually said something simple and direct to Rachel. "We cannot keep solving problems your family created." After that conversation, the visits to our mother became less frequent. Then they stopped. The woman who once enjoyed introducing herself as the mother of 3 successful children now spent most evenings alone in the same quiet house outside Nashville. Almost 6 months passed before I heard from her again. The message did not come directly. David Carter called one afternoon while I was leaving work. "Your mother asked me to reach out to you," he said. I leaned against my car in the parking lot. "What does she want?" "She asked if you would meet with her. She said there are things she wants to say." I looked across the lot where the factory workers were climbing into their cars after the shift ended. For years, I had imagined a conversation like that, a moment when every word left unsaid in our family would finally surface. But standing there in the warm afternoon air, I realized something had changed. I no longer needed that conversation. "Tell her I am not coming back," I said. David Carter paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes." The truth was simple. I had spent most of my 20s trying to become the kind of daughter my mother would be proud of. Every achievement felt like a test I had to pass. The lawsuit ended that cycle. I was no longer waiting for permission to feel successful. That evening, I drove to Tanya Briggs's house for dinner, like I did most Sundays. Her home sat on a quiet hill north of Knoxville, surrounded by tall oak trees and the smell of wood smoke drifting through the cool air. Inside, the kitchen was full of noise. Tanya's two sons were arguing about football scores while she moved between the stove and the table carrying plates of food. "Sit down before they eat everything," she said when she saw me. I took my usual chair while a basket of bread was passed around the table. No one asked about the inheritance. No one asked about lawsuits or bank accounts. The conversation moved easily from work stories to weekend plans to complaints about the Tennessee Volunteers losing another game. At one point, Tanya looked across the table at me. "Everything finally quiet now?" "Yeah," I said. "It's over." "Good," she replied. "Life is too short to keep chasing approval from people who already decided who you were." Later that night, I stepped outside onto the small wooden porch behind the house. The mountains were dark shapes against the sky, the same blue silhouettes my grandmother used to watch from her own porch in Boone. One sentence she had told me during our long afternoons together came back clearly. "Money reveals character faster than hardship." She had been right. The inheritance did not destroy my family. It simply revealed the truth that had been hiding inside it for years. I went back inside and listened to the sound of laughter filling the kitchen. For most of my life, I believed family was something you were required to stay loyal to, no matter what. Now I understood something different. Family is the place where you are allowed to stay exactly as you are. It's the table where no one measures your worth by the number on your paycheck or the car you drive. It's simply the place where people are glad you came. If you've ever been the child your family underestimated, remember something important. The people who dismiss you today are not the ones who get to define your future. Sometimes the life you build after walking away becomes the one that finally feels like home. And if a part of this story felt familiar to you, stay here with us and share your thoughts. Your voice might help someone else realize they are not alone.